Now, Don, I was going through some emails at home the other week and had a couple from 2013, and it seemed like it was a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The Centre Rebellion was in the air, and
the FU,
the FU
Football Union.
Yeah, and it brought me back to someone that we had some dealings with at that time, and a great supporter of the game and all sports in general was Ashley Morrison, who was part of that rebellion. So good morning, Ashley, how are you?
Good morning. I don't know if it was a rebellion. I think it was just trying to be a voice that would be heard, you know?
I'm with you there, absolutely, Ashley. And at that time, there was a sense of frustration that we weren't getting heard. And I think the clubs that did have the fortitude and the gumption to stand up and ask the hard question probably were on the right track, because all the things that we were saying that may happen in the future have actually unfolded in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sad thing was we always knew they were going to, because if everybody had done their homework, there was a paper written on the structure of the NPL because it had failed in the Netherlands. And if you look, it was Hahnberger who brought it in when he was technical director, and it had failed in the Netherlands and had been abandoned after 3 years. So it was suddenly like, why is it going to actually achieve or succeed here in Australia when in a country like the Netherlands, which is steeped in football tradition, if it couldn't work there, you just wondered how it was going to work here. And he hadn't, to be fair, tweaked it enough, in my opinion, and I know certainly Don and a lot of the people that were involved in that, it hadn't been tweaked enough to make it work here.
Yeah, I think the concerns at that time, basically were all about decoupling of juniors and all this sort of stuff. Too much emphasis was being placed and pressure was being placed on clubs to work in areas that we didn't see as being the most important part of keeping clubs surviving and growing and prospering. For us, it was all about, okay, we've got a new brand called NPL. How is NPL going to attract more people? How are we going to get the media to jump on board with this NPL? Are we getting any media coverage, more media coverage now in mainstream media? No, we're not. Are we getting all these new additions, like let's call it the live streaming and that type of stuff happening? Yeah, that's happening, but is that
only now?
Yeah, only now, 6 years later. So I think the concerns that we had then actually were, this thing hasn't been thought through properly enough, and you're forcing clubs to meet certain criteria, which is unrealistic. And I think there were some great clubs at the time that were decimated or harmed by that process, including Southwest Phoenix, Bunbury, including Western Knights. And it just, for all of us who have been in the game for a long time, the alarm bells were ringing.
Well, you mentioned the marketing there, and I remember the exact words of the former CEO, and he goes, "That'll be a work in progress."
Yeah.
And it was, again, there was just a lack of planning. But I think, to me, what was wrong is and again, I look at it now in the press release that came out a few months ago, back I think it was in June, where they were saying they were setting up a working party to look at this junior development side of things with the newly appointed FFA technical director, Rob Sherman. Yeah. Now, they were saying they were going to look at Japan, Belgium, Germany, and that's fantastic. But what you've got to look at, again, is this country has a lot of unique problems. For example, the tyranny of distance, and it's a very different setup to the way Belgium and Germany would be, where players can travel short distances to play games. Here, the distances are a little bit further, and there's just a whole gamut of other sports that are challenging for that space and for the children's time. And I just think we've got to think slightly differently in following those models. But then if you look at the development long term, I think Japan is actually a good lesson, because Japan looked at football and said, look, we can't compete because of our physical stature. We're smaller than everyone. So what did they do? They came up with a 100-year plan for both the men's and the women's game. And one of the things they worked on was their technical ability. And they said, we've got to become better technically. And I would hazard a guess, in my opinion, they're one of the best technical teams in Asia. And the second thing they worked on was their pace. They said, the one thing we have, let's play to our strengths. So they improved their technical ability, and they play the game at a very fast pace and try and, throw other teams with that pace and fitness. And I think if you look at the Australian game, which some people would say, maybe it was a bit brutish, the way it was this never say die, physical game. But it was an attribute that got us results in the past where we didn't necessarily have the technical ability. But I think what we did have in those times, being a multicultural country, was we had the hard-working Europeans that had the physicality. We had the flair players from the Balkans and some of the Italian descent players. And now we're just turning out automatons that all play the same way. And we've lost, to me, the strengths that we had that came from being a multicultural country and having people from diverse backgrounds who had different skills and different attributes to bring to the game. And I think by trying to have everybody play the same way, we've really killed the game.
Yeah, robotic football rather than letting players express themselves. Yeah.
And those results have now manifested themselves in the youth sides we send overseas. We are being outplayed on technical ability. And I think when you think that Graham Arnold's greatest scouting tool is genealogy.com, trying to track players that have been developed by other nations. It's not great.
It's not, but you hit on a really good point there, and I question this now, and I've had discussions with previous Glory coaches, is the scouting system. Now, I think if you look at the NPL system, it's a user-pay system. Now, there are loads of talented footballers playing, I would presume, in areas of Perth that can't afford to play for an NPL club, or their parents can't afford to get them to games. And we're missing that talent because I don't think there is a decent scouting system in place to find that talent and to develop that talent, maybe even offer, and scholarship's probably the wrong word, but to sort of supplement their fees and make it possible for these talented players to get access to coaching and to be able to play. And to me, that is one of the biggest failings, I think, at the moment, is the lack of scouting that's going on around the country.
And I think they in Europe they call it an apprenticeship, but part of that is also about contact hours with coaches. I think at the moment, for the fees that you pay for your NPL, you get an hour and a half twice a week, so 3 hours. If you're competing on a European scale, it's anywhere between 9 and 15 hours coach contact a week. So already we're behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, and I mean, Rob Barn, I remember going when he was the first technical director that the FFA had, and he did a coaching session down at McGillvray Oval. And I remember I went down and watched the session and also then listened to the questions that were posed to him by the parents of those children that were part of that time, the NTC program. And one of the fathers was obviously very proud of his son, and rightly so. And he said, so how many of these players do you think are going to make it? And Rob Barn, being, pretty blunt Dutchman, said none of them. He goes, none of them are good enough. He said, you don't play enough football. And I think, this is one of the things we've got to look at is, to me, if these young players are going to develop to, as you said there, compete in Asia, and we're not talking about competing in the English Premier League or any of the top leagues, just competing in youth tournaments in Asia, they've got to get meaningful competition and meaningful games. And I also think that we mustn't be coaching that flair out of them. I mean, people rave about the likes of Messi and Ronaldo and the things they can do. Have we seen them say, no, play the way you're facing, don't take them hand on, don't play that through ball because it's a percentage ball, it's not a good one, The
other thing is we know how quickly the wheels of the FFA move. If you're a club out there, and do you think we should be waiting until the FFA say, we've got now the new Belgium, Nigerian, African model? Or do we just go out there and go, right, we're going to develop our own kids the Aussie way?
Look, my personal view is I think it comes down to the clubs. I think each club has to look at it. And if you look at the history of the game the world over, there are clubs that have developed players and there are clubs that have bought players. And if you look at the local league, that's been the case here as long as I've lived here, certainly. And I just think, there are some clubs that have done, and Joondalup is a prime example, ECU Joondalup. They had some fantastic youth team coaches. Now, if you look at a lot of those, then because they didn't have their badges, had to walk away from the game, or they had to be down as a team manager rather than a coach. And the sad thing is we've lost a lot of really, really good coaches because they're older people who've been around the game for a very long time. They know the game. They know how to develop children. They know how to develop players. They know how to teach them not just playing skills, but also life skills. And we've lost those because suddenly we've put this stipulation that they have to have this FFA badge. And I think that, to me, was short-sighted because there was a lot of experience and there needed to almost be sort of a neutrality where people that have been involved in the game for so long could stay involved but then the next generation coming through maybe needed those qualifications.
And do you think that the NPL or the development model that we've had has set kids up for failure, and we've lost a lot of kids to the game? They don't succeed at NPL level and end up giving the game away completely.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to you, wasn't I, yesterday when you asked me to come on your show. And there's a friend of mine who I'm obviously not going to say his name there. His father had never been involved in the sport. The son started playing it, was a talented player, and it was part of, one of these squads where everybody's saying, you're on the pathway. So I think he was on the pathway from about 12 or 13, got to 17, and the coach was sort of still. And to be honest, look, this child or young man was clearly going to be a good club player. That was about it. Don't think he was good enough for the A-League because no one had really been sniffing around for him. By the time he's 17, if they're not looking at you by then they're not going to come for you in most cases.
Yeah.
And anyway, he said he wanted to go to the UK, try out for a trial. The coach, instead of being honest with him and saying, no, you're not good enough, or saying, before you go, you need to really improve these areas of your game, just said, no, it'll be a really good experience for you to go over there. Now, this young man went over there. He had trials with 2 clubs. We're not talking Premier League clubs either, lower division clubs in the UK, and was way, way out of his depth. And he came home. He ripped down every picture of football he had in his house. He put all his football books in the bin, all his trophies in the bin, and said the game had made a laughing stock of him because he'd been so humiliated at these trials. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, he attempted suicide. Now, this is a 17-year-old boy, and I can tell you now, he's healthy again, but he is not playing football anymore.
But it's not...
to me, is that a system that is developing people to enjoy the game, to play it for their whole life? No, it's not that. It's a tragic story, and to me the system there has really failed that young boy.
And it's not an isolated story. I see a story come out of the UK today that a former Man U trialist, Joel Darlington, had taken his own life after injuries that put a halt in his career. Now, he was only 20, and I imagine if it's happening there, it's happening here. And we talk about the holistic development of a player and a realistic understanding of where you stand within the system, and mental health is a huge issue, and if we ignore these things, we ignore them at our peril, and we'll more than lose them to the game, we'll lose them from our lives, and that's not acceptable.
It's overselling a dream, and like we've seen it here with the limited opportunities in our A-League for our aspiring local boys who play for the Perth Glory youth team, and obviously I've had a son. I've had 3 or 4 players from the Stirling Lions who went through the system when I was president, and I could see that these kids were gifted, talented, but the openings weren't there unless a coach, and most coaches in the A-League play for survival. They don't play for develop, and or to take the risk of developing. They'll take a shot at maybe one kid to actually that. And you look at the Perth Glory team. How many local boys have we actually developed here and played in our team that we've kept here? No, there's probably only, you can name 2 or 3 max. Most of our good kids have had to go far and wide.
Brandon O'Neill.
There's so many names, including Lewis Italiano. And so you look at it and you say, how are we managing the mental state of these kids when they sold this dream, and then they move out of that corridor of elite football, and then get offered, well, you're not good enough for that, you just come and play state league. You find a lot of boys basically just give up on the game, and that's the sad part about it.
But the one thing I'd like to add to that, it's not, and let's be fair, this is not just happening in football, it's happening in other sports as well, where you're seeing players that are selected to, say, a national development squad or, again, an elite program, and then they're dropped from it. Now, one of the things that I think should be absolutely essential and in place, and some sports do it, some don't, is they should be given a report when they have dropped from that program as to why they've been dropped. What areas of their game were they lacking? What did they need to go away and work on to become a better player? Because it seems to me ridiculous when we're investing, and you touched on there, Don, where a lot of the youth players at the Glory were there on 2-year deals, and then after that 2-year deal, they were released. And yet you're trying to suddenly say that these players who you thought had talent then after 2 years in an elite environment don't have the talent. But they obviously had something. The question is, you didn't develop that well you had them, or some of them, fair enough, some of them aren't going to make it. But there's surely some of them, the higher percentage, if they'd have had that investment and had the development or been told to go away and work on these things, they may well have been able to. But then also on the flip side of that, the problem we have today is, and I actually had a conversation with a coach literally a week ago, who one of their players had gone over to a national setup, then was released from the squad and didn't make the final cut. And the coach said, well, did you ask them what you needed to work on? And he goes, no. And because kids don't today do that. No. It's not their nature. So again, to me, there's a responsibility. If you have a player that is going on, you need to tell them how to interact with the coach that they're going to work with, or try and make them get in a position where they can actually say, look, I don't understand that, or what do you want me to do? Because my club coach wants me to do this. You're asking me to do this. I'm a little bit confused. And I think we're not, that to me is, again, a crucial part of development.
But it happens at the highest level. I mean, Man City basically paid $60 million for a substitute in Riyad Mahrez, who all of last season got a charity run here and there because for Guardiola, he didn't work hard enough in the defensive end of the game. Now, over the summer, he's been working on that like a Trojan, and he's now starting games. And, when you play for City, you, as a winger, you have to be able to defend. And, he could have just easily said, oh, look, sell me to another club that will put up with my lack of defensive ability, because he was good enough. So it's not just at the bottom end, but it's the top end as well. But we need to concentrate on everything. And it shows that players can be developed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is the old thing, isn't it? If a player wants to make it, they'll listen and they'll go away and work on their game.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Ashley, you are and always have been a visionary in football. I do enjoy talking to you. Very knowledgeable, not just in football, but in just about every sport I can think of. And
I don't know about that.
Oh, no, you know a lot more about boxing than I ever will.
How are you enjoying the smorgasbord of sports that you commentate and are involved in, Ashley? Because it's great to see you, as I called you, the George Grillicic of the modern era, getting in amongst every sport.
Oh, look, I love what I do nowadays, and it's challenging at times. The Asian Games, for example, last year, I got thrown 8 hours of commentary on Pencak Silat, which I'd never heard of, and I also got thrown the rollerblading and skateboarding, which skateboarding is an incredibly technical sport, and I'm not sure I actually did it justice, but I didn't get any complaints, so that's the main thing.
Look, you're a true champion, Ashley. Do enjoy talking to you, and thank you for your time this morning.
No problem. Thanks very much for the call.
Thank you.
Good on you, Ash.
Ashley Morrison, and he's the modern George Grillicic, as you said.
Yeah.
And look, back in those days, I know we had a very fixed idea of where we wanted to be, and hopefully we can get there again. But, interesting times, Dom. Brought back a lot of memories.
It
Some
did.
very good people involved.
Fantastic people. Yeah. And Penny just sent a little message saying Ashley is talking about equipping kids with skills to self-reflect and educating kids to have confidence to know what they want, but with respect. Love your philosophy, Ashley. So, Pen's a big fan, as are all the rest of us.
No worries.